Welcome to the New Hampshire Union Leaders Voters First Forums. My name is Joe McQuaid, publisher of the Union Leader.
And I'm Todd Fahey, State Director of AARP New Hampshire. AARP is a nonpartisan advocacy organization. We're looking forward to hearing candidate positions on important issues. This year, we're focused on Social Security and what candidates will do to ensure that this program remains strong and available for future generations.
If you're watching this live on YouTube, feel free to submit a question. And now, let's hear from a candidate. Jack Flanagan is with us today, running for Congress, 2nd District, has been in the legislature and been a school board member from Brookline and Mason.
Correct.
And on your website, relative to issues,
Yep.
you don't have any issues up.
That was purposeful.
Yeah, well, yes, but extraordinary, because you want people to contact you
Well,
to ask you what their issues are?
It's twofold. Yeah, one is, by all means, I want to hear from the voters, but I figure if I put issues out on my webpage, my opponent would sit there and manipulate them and say what they really aren't. So I figured, if someone's got an issue that they want to share with me, there's an info link. They can, go ahead and click on it and send me whatever their concerns are. And I have had people reach out to me.
But isn't it more difficult for the voter who may not be engaged enough to send you a note? Isn't it difficult for him or her to compare and contrast you with the other candidate if they don't know your positions on certain issues?
It could be, but if you look at what I've spelled out, it's pretty simple. Is it constitutional? Does the legislation make sense? And third, does it have unintended consequences? And we all live with the unintended consequences. Look at Obamacare, right? Premiums have gone up for people that are higher income now. How many people does it truly affect positively and how many people negative? So those are what a legislator actually does. I've had a lot of people from Concord that have been up there a lot longer than when I told them about it, they go, yeah, that's pretty much what we do.
Not to be argumentative, but if you say, is it sensible? It's sensible in the eyes of the person who's either crafting the legislation or voting on it, which gives you a lot of leeway. Your opponent, should you win the Republican nomination, is incumbent Annie Custer.
Correct.
Who in Concord this week at a meeting relative to drug problems said that she feels safer with her adult boys, 25 and 26, residing in Brooklyn, New York, rather than in New Hampshire. What do you make of such a statement? Do you think it's true?
Does that mean she's moving too?
She didn't suggest that. Maybe you're going to help her in that, but...
That might be true. No, I think we did a really good job dealing with the opioid situation. We had a task force set up. It was the year after I was the majority leader, but I was involved with the process. We were looking at bills that were in Concord dealing with education for our youth, treatment, which we increased by 75%, and finally law enforcement, the granite hammer, which was the last bill that we passed. And the funny thing was Mrs. Custer served on a bipartisan commission in Washington doing the similar process, right? Looking at all the bills that are being put forward and try to advocate for them and let people know that this bipartisan committee supported or not supported or felt that it needed to be shepherded through the process. So if we're so bad, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. I think we did a good job at what we did. I actually am the co-sponsor of a bill called the PMP, Prescription Monitoring Program, which is now mandatory in this latest task force. But I co-sponsored that with Peter Schmidt. He just beat me to the punch. But it basically finds out who's doctor shopping. They would go to one doctor or another and get new prescriptions for opioids. And it cut down the number of legal opioid use, which then, I guess, went to the street. But that's now what's kicking in with the task force. So I don't agree with her. I think we've done a good job at what needed to be done. And don't forget, and then we were talking about this offline, is that we're dealing with an addiction that lasts almost 3 years. It's not like 3 weeks and then you're clean. I mean, these people are fighting this addiction. And what my physician told me was that literally after 11 days of opioid use, the chemistry, your brain chemistry actually changes. So that's why it takes that long to recover from the addiction. So this is a nasty situation that's something that we haven't seen because of those situations. But no, I totally disagree. I think we're taking a very active approach, both with training, treating, and the rest, the legal piece. And just so you know, too, from a numbers perspective, is we increased funding in our last budget, the budget that Maggie Hassan vetoed, by 75%. She vetoed it for 3 months. So I don't know how many people we lost because of the delay in the funding for treatment.
Jack, I don't know how closely you followed this because you're running for Congress, but in Concord, there's been a lot of talk in the past couple of days about the alcohol fund set aside from the Liquor Commission.
Yep.
Is that strictly to be applied to efforts against alcoholism, or can that money be used for other drug problems as well, and should it be?
To be honest with you, is that a dedicated fund is only so dedicated based on how much we're short in the budget cycle. Mm-hmm. Okay, whether it be licensing for fishing licenses or for renewable energy and things like that. But I truly believe the assumption in there that we should be including the opioid treatment along with alcohol, because it is a substance abuse. I just don't know the numbers and how much it's being used for alcohol, and how it could be the actual law, the way it's written, if we can transfer some of that money. I think it's all hands on deck. I mean, to be totally honest with you, I don't think it's one size fits all. If we can do something better, let's do it. That's always been the approach, right? What's the right thing? We were talking about that earlier, but let's get it done. Let's take care of the problem and then help people's lives, make it better.
Mr. Bossy?
You're running in a district that's elected a Democrat most of the last times, except in the 2010 wave. It's a presidential year in a district that Hillary Clinton is heavily favored to carry. How do you convince Republican primary voters, one, that it's a winnable seat and worth their attention, and two, that you're the candidate to win it?
Well, Grant, I love the question, because if you look at the most recent polls, Mrs. Custer's favorability is about 38%. I'm at 32%. But the real number that is in the numbers is that I carry independents and undeclareds by over 7% over Mrs. Custer, a two-term incumbent. And as we all know, being political, is that it's 30% Democrat, 30% Republican, and 40% independent or undeclareds. So if I'm leading her in that group, the larger group, there is a good chance of me beating her in November.
Jack, sticking with this theme, how do you respond to Republicans and conservatives that think that you've left that branch of the party because you vote on Medicaid? You've gotten some tough reaction out there among Republicans, some that call you a rhino.
Sure. I prefer a Reagan Republican, to be totally honest with you. But regardless of the labels, look what we've done when I was the majority leader. First time in 20 years we had business tax cuts. I wouldn't call that a liberal position. We fought the federal government and got Common Core testing, went from 7 to 3 tests, and then President Obama came out a month and a half later saying that if you'd like to mirror what we did in New Hampshire, feel free to do it. It's acceptable from the Department of Education. We have a balanced budget, and we went from $8 million surplus to $100 million surplus. Let's see, what are the other things that we did? Oh, workers' compensation reform. It didn't make it out of the Senate, but myself and Will Infantine out of Manchester managed to amend the workers' comp statute to where it produced a 10% reduction the very first year when we enacted it, and another 6% is supposed to be for this year. So those are not what I would call liberal, touchy-feely, and constitutional carry. We had 2 bills, one in the House and one in the Senate. The strategy that I put forth to the Speaker was, let's put the House bill in a drawer, let's take the Senate bill and get it passed through there, get it passed through the House. And of course, Governor Hassan vetoed it. But we took the House bill out the second year during an election year and did it again to see if she would capitulate, and she didn't, obviously. But I was the one that basically spearheaded that whole process there. And for whatever it's worth, if it's, as a conservative that was worried about the Second Amendment, I was the one in the Rules Committee that suggested that we no longer make the State House a gun-free zone. So from that perspective, I completely think that I am not rhino. There's some personality issues that we're all aware of from inside baseball that have come up. Medicaid expansion, and that was what you started with.
I like a candidate who actually remembers the question and doesn't dodge it, goes back to it. Wow.
I'm policy, Joe. That's probably why the Speaker had me as Majority Leader. $800 million, okay? It's Medicaid expansion. We already take Medicaid and we get reimbursed at 50 cents on the dollar, and these people are borderline. They, in fact, we're getting reimbursed at 90 cents on the dollar, okay? But the number, remember, it's $800 million. So if I didn't take $800 million into the state to fix roads and bridges, what would you say?
Well, Dan wouldn't say anything because he's a reporter. Bossy would say.
Would be writing editorials.
I would ask if federal taxpayers are less important than New Hampshire taxpayers, because it's not the federal government's money either.
It's our money that we've already given to them. We're getting it back, okay? But here's the real issue. When I voted for Medicaid expansion, I looked at the numbers. Coas County has the highest unemployment rate. It's got the highest utilization rate of Medicaid expansion, right? And we learned through research is that a lot of people got healthy and then went back to work. So how is someone going to be able to go back to work if they're not healthy? All right? I want to lower the unemployment rates, and if it means that they get some health care, great. Grafton County, Sullivan County, all close to, let's see, Coas was close to 6%, Grafton and Sullivan were close to 5%. Cheshire County and Hillsborough were lower percentage, but because of the numbers, a lot of people were on it. So the concept was, I got $800 million, I got hopefully a healthier workforce that they can go back to work. I can't really change the law. I cannot change the Affordable Care Act in Concord. I can in Washington, and trust me, with an insurance background, I'm going after it. Sure. But that's the logic that I took. I can't change it. There's $800 million. The downside was much smaller than the upside.
Right, there's talk in Concord and across the state from Democrats and some Republicans about making Medicaid expansion permanent. Do you support that goal?
No, I do not. Because my goal is that if we get them healthy and they get jobs, here's the other thing too, is I supported the work amendment that said you can't get it unless you're working. So if it does come up again, it better have something as it pertains to work, because I don't want people's lifestyles. I think Frank Edelblut had said that it traps people into this lifestyle, of free stuff. Well, that's not my position. I want to give people a hand up, not a handout.
What would you replace the Affordable Care Act with as a member of Congress?
Well, actually, the House GOP have a new plan where it's based on tax subsidies. But what people have to understand is Obamacare, which is the Affordable Care Act, is a top-down approach. Basically, the federal government says you have to have insurance. It's got to have A, B, C, D, E, and F. All right, all these mandates, which are driving the price of insurance up. If you're a young person, and I'm not that anymore, but say you want a catastrophic plan, you can't get it based on Obamacare. You have to one size fits all. And what the House GOP has done is basically say it's market-driven. It's based on the consumer. It's not based on the government. And to help people to be able to afford it, instead of subsidizing it through the Affordable Care Act, is that we will give you tax incentives to do it, similar to buying a home, because it's important to have a healthy nation. So that's what I would be supporting, something like that. But the nice thing about that program is, it's something that I always suggested was, let's put all these grown-ups in a room, lock the door, that know what they're talking about insurance-wise, and let's come up with a solution, see if it works. And they did. They took committee chairs, people had better experience in insurance, and they did just that. So I got to give them credit, and that's what I'd be supporting.
Jack, is 2nd Congressional District, you said you think you do well with independents. If it's a winnable seat, have you gotten any indication that the National Republican Congressional Committee will put any money in back of you or Mr. Lawrence if you get the nomination?
I have been told by various people that if you're within a couple of points, then you'll see it. And right now, with the last poll, with the margin of error, I'm 1.8 percentage points behind Mrs. Custer. Okay. So that's with 3 months to go.
On issues, again, your website is less than transparent. Well, I guess it's transparent because there's nothing there to see, but.
Send me an email, Joe.
No, we've got you here.
That's true.
And we
That's true.
also have an audience which can
That's right.
send in questions as well.
That's right.
On abortion,
Yes.
you say you're pro-choice with certain reservations.
Yes.
You concede then that the unborn baby is in fact a human being?
Those exceptions would be parental notification. And these are bills that I supported when I was a legislator, and late term, which is already federal law. Those are the two exceptions. I'm pro-choice.
But so you concede or don't concede that the unborn baby is a human being?
Correct.
Okay. What do you got there, Grant?
Well, we just wanted to remind everybody that we're conducting these candidate interviews in cooperation with AARP of New Hampshire.
good.
And they've got a couple of questions they
Sure.
want us to ask all the federal candidates. And first, what is your plan to ensure the future of Social Security?
Thank you so much for that question, because I'm the only one, literally, of all the candidates, that and medical insurance buying across state lines. I hope you ask me about that, too. Yeah, the Social Security and Medicare. In 10 years, a second largest budget expense at the federal level going to be interest on the debt. Let's balance our budget. Let's have a balanced budget amendment. Let's have a line item veto. Let's do what we do in Concord. That is, be fiscally conservative.
We have a line item veto in Concord?
No, we don't. That's, all right, you caught me on that one, Joe. But the reality is we need to be better stewards of the taxpayers' money. Because here's what's happened, is that if we can take that money, balance our budgets, and get out of the debt so we don't have interest payments, we'll have plenty of money to support ourselves with Social Security and Medicare. Some of my challenger or even other people are saying, well, we need the means tested. We need to up the age before you can grab it. We need to increase the amount of money you make. And my question is why? Why don't we just run our government more efficient the way we do our households? And trust me, when we're talking about the second largest line item in the budget, we're talking billions of dollars. And we were just talking earlier about the mistakes they make on just making their payments of their checks of $6 billion a year. Well, in 10 years, that's another $60 billion. I mean, these are numbers that begin with B's but soon come into T's. And the big problem happened when the federal government took $2.5 trillion out of Social Security, and on top of that, they're taking money out of for these disabled people that have miraculously come up after 2008 and the recession. So we have to be better stewards of our tax money.
So your solution to the Social Security problem is a balanced budget.
Absolutely.
And
growth. We need to grow our economy too.
so that is more realistic likely than addressing the Social Security question by tweaking the ages. You think it is more realistic for Congress to come up with a balanced budget amendment to solve the Social Security concerns rather than it is to tweak the Social Security?
Well,
you say somewhere, I think, on your website,
Yeah.
that you're about solutions
Yes.
to problems.
Yes. I mean, I just cited one, but here's the thing, okay? The politicians, and I guess I'd be one of them, caused the problem, right? Because they raided $2.5 trillion out of the Social Security Trust Fund, okay, to balance the budget or whatever, to spend however they want to do for whatever pork. And the reality is they need to fix it. And I'm telling you, the fix is balanced budget amendment, okay? Get rid of the interest payment, expand the economy, because if instead of at 1 or 2% growth, we're at 4 or 5% growth, then there's more revenue coming into the federal government too. So we're spending less on interest, there's more money coming in based on revenue growth. We're not going to have a problem.
Your presidential nominee is of that opinion.
Yes, Governor Kasich's the same one, yeah.
There's no reason to touch Social Security because the economy is going to grow.
Right.
So you are in support of your
I was-
presidential nominee?
I was one of his first endorsers in the state once he got here, yes, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly with the governor, and that was one of the reasons why I supported him.
Not the candidate you supported, the nominee,
the
Mr.
current-
Trump.
Oh,
Current nominee.
okay, I was talking about Governor Kasich.
Who's coming back next week?
Yes, I know he is.
No, the current nominee of your party,
He's
one Donald J. Trump.
Yes, he's talking about growing the economy too.
Correct.
Right,
And
inversion
you-
is his issue. He thinks that the current, what we have is at 35% corporate tax. If you're a manufacturer, say you manufacture in Ireland, not only do they pay the 15% in Ireland that they charge, but again, the 35%. And the Democrats are basically saying, you're taking all these business out of our country. No, the tax rate is taking them out of the country, and that's what Mr. Trump wants to do, is to have some parity so that literally we are close to, or it is less efficient for someone to move their business out off the shores of the United States.
I get from your answer that you are in support of your presidential nominee.
I am going to vote for my nominee.
Oh, it's the Ayotte theory.
No, it's the Flanagan theory. And the only reason is Mrs. Clinton will not be supporting my positions. Right? She's not for smaller government or a more efficient government. She's not for a balanced budget amendment. These guys know me from Concord. I mean, we need to be accountable. I mean, that's what I've always done locally in the towns that I live in the state level. I don't think the federal, just because it's a different zip code doesn't make any difference to me. This is who I am, okay? We don't spend more than we need to spend, and we don't spend it wastefully, all right? And we make sure that we get the economy growing. I mean, that's something that I've always believed in. And matter of fact, when I first got to Concord in 2010, I knew these issues, you know, the spending, the workers' compensation reform, business tax cuts. I knew all those needed to be transformed. We just needed to have the right position going into it.
Quick follow-up. Jack.
Sure, Dan.
On Social Security reform. If elected and if you're on the Capitol Hill and there's a bill for means testing or phasing in an older retirement date for beneficiaries, would you support both of those? Or
I'd look at it. I mean, let me put it this way, Dan, and you know me a little while, is I don't think any good idea happens in a vacuum, so I'm willing to listen, whether it be a Democrat or Republican. But I also know that my position is a solid position. I mean, it's an issue about having enough money to pay for the program. Okay, I don't want to pay interest anymore. I want to pay it towards Social Security or Medicare. But
you're not advocating, you're saying you'll be open to consider.
well, I mean, if they want to make it instead of 115,000 to 120,000, or one more year, and they can give me the actuarial tables that show that the net benefit is substantial, I might take a look at it. But I'm not sure if I'm a big fan of it. I remember one school administrator used the analogy, it's a stick and jello. I mean, I'm not, I don't have to be there, but this is where I'd like to be. But if we need to bend it a little bit here and a little bit there, then if it works and we can make it work and it's productive, then I'll look at it.
We have another question submitted through the web, through the YouTube channel, right up there to the right of the video if you're watching on YouTube. It's asking how you close the gap in the state employee pension fund. Obviously, as a member of Congress, you can't do a lot. So let me ask you, as majority leader and as a state representative,
Right.
What did you do to close the unfunded liability in the New Hampshire retirement system?
Well, in 2010, when Speaker O'Brien was there, we did a lot of things which didn't make a lot of people happy. You know, the double dipping, the increase that the cities and towns had to pay. But it just so happened a former boss of mine is now in charge of the retirement fund, George Lagos. And I used to work with him at New Hampshire Insurance Company. And it was an interesting paradigm because he was always my boss as a lawyer, and now he came to meet with myself and the speaker, and it was the shoe was on the other foot. It was an interesting situation. But he told me that within 15 years we would be at 85% funded, and that he said that we didn't have to make any more changes. And I looked at him, and he's a bright guy, and I said, "Are you sure? Because this is a position that we may be taking, other than looking at other proposals that are in this committee for reforming the pension plan." And nothing passed, which is normally what happens, but I'm sort of falling back on that as it relates to his actuarials that have looked at it. He's a smart man. I tend to listen to smart people and try to make the right decision.
What's the funding level now?
I think it's at 55%. I could be wrong. You might know, Grant, better than I do on those numbers.
Last I saw was 58, but
Okay.
it could have moved.
Yeah, I think it's and I could be wrong on this, but anything north of 75% is a comfort zone.
This Washington zip code that you're going after,
Yeah.
How long would you want to be in that zip code?
That's a really good question. I'm getting older, and we talked about children and grandchildren, so most of my children are out of the house. I've done 6 years in Concord, and it's been one of the true pleasures of my life. I was driving home one day, you know, when you have those, oh, I now know what I want to do when I grow up moments?
No, I haven't had that.
You haven't had that yet? Well, I had mine. And it was that I realized that I truly love the job of a legislator. And you've probably seen it up in Concord. I get into this stuff. I love policy. Matter of fact, when I stepped down from majority leader and got back into a committee, I was like, this is where I belong. And that's the aha moment. I don't really know. I guess when it isn't fun anymore. And I don't want to sound facetious about it, but I'm just saying is that I like what I do. I don't consider myself a politician. I consider myself really a public servant. All this 25 years that I've served has been fun. I really do enjoy it. And if you ask anybody else up in Concord, it is truly enjoyable for me to be there.
The last 3 presidents have each increased the use of executive orders to kind of trump what...
No pun intended.
No pun intended, but no matter who the next president is, neither of the 2 nominees seems all that modest about the use of executive authority.
Right.
How would you, as a member of Congress, strengthen the checks and balances that Congress has on the executive?
It's hard. And to be totally honest with you, I would probably work more at try to control agency rules. I mean, agencies now, like the EPA and that type of thing, Department of Energy, FERC, talking about gas pipelines, is that they become the 4th branch of government without any controls. In Concord, we have JLCAR. You're familiar with, I think, JLCAR, Joint Legislative Committee on Agency Rules. I think we need something like that in Washington, D.C. to control the impact these agencies are having on businesses and cities and towns. As it relates to executive orders, they are in charge of the executive branch. Now, the only option would be whether or not it usurps the legislative branch. And I think we saw that in immigration law, right? When President Obama wanted to allow certain people in, and it usurped the legislative branch. And that's where the court system come in. But it's a tough thing to do. I mean, because he's actually within his purview, as long as he doesn't step in it. But I think the bigger thing is the agency rules. And I'd love to see, and I know Rand Paul had a bill that he put on the Senate side that capped agency rules based on a dollar impact, like was $10 million, I think, that he had. So there is some traction there, and I think it would be getting rid of that 4th branch. Just to share with you, too, about agency rules is the selectman of Hollis, which is the neighboring town where I live, we were talking, and he goes, you did hear about our $300,000 assessment from the EPA? And I go, no. He goes, well, they have a new rule, or have a rule that they finally changed that was to test groundwater runoff. So depending on the size of the town, you, in fact, would have to be paying like $300,000 to check the water in all these different bodies of water, even the aquifer, if it was able to, and it's costing them potentially $300,000. And I called my own town administrator, and he says, we didn't get hit. And he already suggested, my town administrator, that the National Regional Planning Commission hire somebody and let all the towns that are impacted to be paid for the person to do it independently instead of having this lab do it. But these regulations are affecting cities and towns and us, our taxpayers, just like businesses, and it's getting out of control.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
How about a war resolution, the authorization for the use of force?
Yeah.
Some people say Congress should finally step up and have that authorization to combat ISIS and others.
We haven't had it because ISIS is not a country.
Do you think it's needed?
Here's my feeling on ISIS, and I've talked to a number of people in the military. The Shia and the Sunni have been killing each other for decades. And now all of a sudden they decide they want to kill Americans. All right, so what do we have? We have them located in a certain area. We need a presence in the Middle East, in a country like Jordan or Saudi Arabia, that would provide access, if need be, to intervene, but only if need be, okay? We've got the social media piece with domestic terrorists, right? They become self-initiated and they go into these restaurants or train stations or airports and do their damage. We need to better control, and I hate to say this, we've mentioned Rand Paul and the NSA and the Patriot Act. We need to take a look at social media. And I know it's a First Amendment issue too, but the long and the short of it is I think we need a much more all-hands-on-deck, proactive approach. But your question was about war. It's very difficult to have a war in an area of the country, of the world, when there isn't a penalty for a country to have. Because ISIS is just transient, right? They don't really have a country. They claim, but they're not really in charge. So if it was an act of war, I would want to make sure that we had all our ducks in a row and we knew what it was. And this is what my military friends say, what's our exit strategy? How do we know we won?
So you're not sold on the authorization for the use of military force in connection
no.
with the Islamic State?
No, I'm not. I think, and here's another thing, is I was talking to a gentleman from Pakistan, and he said that drones are coming in and attacking villages, but the collateral damage is actually creating more interest in ISIS because they now consider us, we're the aggressor and let's kill the infidel. I mean, it really does perpetuate it. It's not Donald Trump, as the Democrats would have you say, is a recruiting tool. It's these damn drones.
Damn drones.
Damn drones.
Would it be better if there were a pilot in the plane dropping the bomb or a drone? What's the difference?
It might be more accurate. I don't know. The question then becomes is, do we really need it? I mean, if we can contain them some other way without going in and killing them individually. In other words, my original statement was this is a group of people that have been fighting with each other for centuries. So why are they now against us?
Shiites are not ISIS, that's the Sunnis.
Shia and the Sunnis have been fighting for decades.
Well, they've been, actually for a couple of thousand years, they've been
That's what I
fighting.
mean, yeah.
Sort of like the Catholics and the Protestants in Northern Ireland
Yeah.
on it. Do you favor continuation of the volunteer military that we have, or do you think there should be required military service of people?
I like the volunteer piece of it, but what I don't like is the way our armed services are treated, whether it be the benefits they receive, their salary increases which were promised, were never provided, they were cut. This healthcare issue is just, to no end, bothers me. I mean, here are the people that are giving the most and they're getting the least as it comes to medical care. This choice card, for example, that they have based on their geographics, I'm sorry, the VA is as bad as the IRS. And if we give them a choice card, they should have a choice of hospitals, regardless of how far away they are. Which anytime, and we're all, I assume, good Republicans, is whenever you put choice into the equation, all right, undeclared or independence, whenever we put choice in there, it makes the quality of service, care, product better. Because if all of a sudden we don't need as many VA hospitals, the VA is going to figure it out. When one of these soldiers, Marines, Air Corpsmen, whatever, call up, they better not get an answering machine anymore, because that's what they're getting. They have a problem, they're not getting treatment.
Do you know what percentage of the American population serves in the military?
I think it's single digits.
Oh, very low single digits.
Yeah.
It's less than 2%.
And you know, the reality too is, if you had a position or a job that had this benefit, that benefit, you knew you had health care, versus once you got out, you had to, scratch and scrape and try to get somebody to help you. I mean, I know a guy that served in Vietnam. He was a machine gunner. The guy feeding got killed. He had injured his leg so bad, but and I've known this gentleman for over 40 years, he just now got an artificial knee, replace it and so forth. And they're still giving him a hard time about whether it was work related. I mean, it's like the guy got shot in Vietnam. That's the other thing is, we're losing approximately one veteran an hour with suicide because they can't have cases adjudicated as it relates to long-term injury, it's like a workers' comp claim. We only have 66 judges in the entire country that are listening to these cases. And we're losing veterans over it. 300,000 veterans died either waiting for service or waiting for this adjudication. And there's a little over 300,000 members of the VA working.
Jack?
Yes.
You have an insurance background.
Yeah, I do.
So I would imagine that's the kind of committee that if you had your druthers, you would want to serve
Probably,
on?
yeah. Although it's different. Like in Concord, their workers' compensation, which is property casualty, is handled in the Labor Committee, which is where I've been for well, other than my tour as Majority Leader, I'm now the Vice Chairman of Labor. Will Infantine is the chair from Manchester. And rightfully so, he's a very bright man. He knows a lot about insurance, but it includes labor issues, union issues, and things like that. But in Washington, insurance could be covered under commerce. I don't really know the delineation, but that type of background would be applicable. I've run and started small businesses. If we could convince them to do a gel car situation, I would love it. It would be a very busy, committee because there's about 438 agencies, all creating their own agencies. That's another thing too. Did you know there was between 6 and 10 agencies out there that have the word efficiencies in it? Why don't we have an agency called efficiencies? You know, how many
inefficiencies?
Well, I'm just saying, how many agencies do you need to be looking into efficiencies? Let's have one big, agency that says, I'm going to go in and see the EPA today and make sure they run efficiently. Or better, let's start with those payables that are off by $6 billion a year.
We have a YouTube question about federal regulations. How do you feel about the Department of Labor's new regulations on white-collar employees, and how do you think this will affect the economy?
Yeah, this is new. I heard about it. Basically, it says that if you work overtime, even though you're paid salary, that you get paid overtime. And I don't agree with it. Then everybody should be hourly and not be salaried.
Well, I think this is a classification where, depending on your annual salary.
Oh, there is a cap, yeah,
Yeah.
over a certain dollar.
About 47,000. They're
Is it
changing the cap
47?
to $47,000, so it's going to capture a lot more people.
I've lived with the old situation, and I'm rather indifferent, but I'm sure businesses don't like it. And the net effect, the unintended consequences, if in fact we lose more, lower middle class jobs, I'm against it. But I can see if it was abusive, there might be an issue. So maybe it would need to be changed, but I'm not really too crazy about automatic. That provision just, let's face it, sometimes you are, expected to, like traveling. I remember, when I worked for New Hampshire Insurance, I'd have to get up early in the morning, go to the airport, get on an airplane, fly to some other place, do whatever work had to be done, and then I'd get home at midnight. Okay, does that mean that I should have been paid for those traveling time? So there's not always an answer to the question. It just, I think, I'd rather see the companies have it as an internal policy, to be honest with you.
What's the breakdown Republican versus Democrat Congress in New England these days, on the House side?
Let's see. Well, in New England, we have one in New Hampshire. That would be Frank Ginta, and then Annie Custer. I think Frank's the only Republican, I think. Because Massachusetts and Rhode Island, no. Connecticut, no.
There's a rep in Maine.
Is there Maine? That was the next state. But they have two reps in Maine?
They do, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a total of two.
Doesn't that argue in favor of the New Hampshire should elect a Democrat because the Democrats are calling the shots and would better represent New England?
No, it's the other way around. Currently in Washington, there's more Republicans, so if you want to get something done, it's better that you're a Republican because they're in the majority.
If you are in Washington, would you support Paul Ryan as Speaker?
I would want to see who else, but I like the fact that Paul Ryan's fiscally conservative. Paul Ryan was an intern, I believe, under Governor Kasich when he was in Congress. So that in itself, that makes me biased towards him, but it doesn't get his vote. Is that a way to respond? I like the fact that my positions might be advocated by gentlemen like Paul Ryan, because I really want to see a balanced budget amendment.
Voters want candidates who will predictably follow through on their campaign promises. They also want people that will work across the aisle.
Yep.
Can you do both?
Yeah. I do it now. I mean, I have a tough time with some of these pledges that are, you got to do this, got to do that, got to do this. But if I look at the pledge and I say, I can do this, I'm okay with it, then fine. I won't tell you something that I will do or won't do and then do it or don't do it. And if I contradict myself, I will give you the reason for it. I will say, and this is what tears me up, is when you put a non-germane amendment on a bill. This is politics 101, right? Well, you had a bill that would allow you to vote for things that you promised to do. Yeah, but someone stuck an amendment on that bill that made the national debt go up by $7 trillion or something like that. He goes, well, you promised. It's like, yeah, but I couldn't vote for it because of this thing. And one of the things that bugs me, that I will see if there's a way to fix it, is House rules. We have in Concord, amendments have to be germane, okay, especially if it's made it through the committee. So before you can hang something on it. So they should be changing House rules, and same thing with the Senate. The 60-vote majority before the bill can even be heard. I mean, people are manipulating that too. Let's hear the stuff. That's literally what's causing Washington, D.C. to have the problems, are these rules that they have that make it almost impossible to do things that need to be done.
Jack, you said, and I did find this on your website, that
The donation link?
No.
Or the address?
No, the two most important things that you think a congressman does are constituent services
yes.
and legislation.
Yep.
So you've mentioned the balanced budget amendment,
Yep.
which is introduced all the time, and I guess you would push. Constituent services, what exactly does that mean? How does a congressman interact?
Sure. My son wants to get into the Air Force Academy or the Naval Academy. Who do I contact? Do I, do this? And then you'll have someone in your staff, or if you knew somebody that works in the military, you could get them to the right person. I mean, here's an example of constituent services that I did locally, and it's not really governmental. I had a single mom with kids living in their home saying that I just got notice that my house is being foreclosed on 2 days after Christmas. I said, okay, what would you like me to do? He says, well, can you stop it or delay it? I can't stop it because you didn't pay your bills, but let me see if I can delay it. So I myself called the bank, and they said, Representative, we can't talk to you until she okays it. She has to call in and put it on the file. So I told her, and she put it on the file. So I called back a month later, and I said, oh yeah, there's notes on the file. He said, we understand what you're saying, and no, it's not right to be foreclosing 2 days after Christmas. Would February be okay? In other words, I couldn't stop the foreclosure, but the service I did for her was to get her
Time.
and get her things in order, right? Pack things up. Anybody that sold a house or had to move out of a house had to do that. Or a business, comes to me and they say, I'm having trouble with a specific agency. Can you look into it and find out what I did wrong or didn't do wrong? I mean, the more they learn, the more they find out about it. So you call, Commissioner Kapatis, or you call, who's the commissioner in DES, Barack, Commissioner Barack. So you are a liaison to help them because you represent the people that you serve. So that's what constituent service means. At the federal level, I use the example of getting in the military, but sure, businesses or education. The Department of Education is out of control. And if you had do we have enough time to tell you about what I want to do with education?
Sure. Well, as long as it's no more than an hour.
It won't be that long. We're all familiar with Common Core, right? Which is, in essence, the lowest level of education. Standards, that is. And this is something I've chaired a number of school boards, and I have a master's degree, but not in education. But what I'd like to do is reduce the size of the Department of Education in Washington, because there's no constitutional requirement in education in the U.S. Constitution, and have analysts in the state of New Hampshire. Say for every 40, 50,000 students, there's one analyst. So we could have basically 3 analysts in the state, and they go from school district to school district and find out what best practices is. So we may have 4th grade manipulatives that are effective, and they go share it with Bedford or whatever town, say, this is what they do in Brookline, you might want to try it. So all of a sudden now, instead of at the lowest level, is there are teaching at the the highest level and striving to get better. Every quarter then, all of these analysts from all over the country will get together in Washington, D.C. and say, in Oregon, you know what we do with 10th grade civics? We do A, B, and C, and these Congress people come out and visit with us. You might want to try it at your level. So then they go back to their districts. So what happens? Slowly but surely, the curriculum gets better and better and better. So instead of teaching the Common Core approach, which is the lowest level, now we have nationwide, because that's what Common Core advocates, right? Everybody teaches at the same level. Well, now instead of teaching at the lowest level, we're teaching at the highest level. And the money we save at the Department of Education can be block granted back to these school districts to help pay for some of these curriculum changes, if it's new books or if it's new pieces of equipment. So we've gone from the same amount of money that we're currently spending from the worst level to everybody at the highest level. This is what we need to do in Washington, D.C. We need to take common sense and say, how do we make it better? How do we make people's lives better?
Education expense
It's
is high for the individual, especially at the college level. What does U.S. Representative Jack Flanagan intend to do about that? Damn it.
Damn it. There's a lot of fault. And Gordon Gee, who was the president of, I think it was University of Ohio at the time, I met him at a GOPAC meeting. Bright guy, really bright guy. And he was talking about how universities can save money. And he privatized the parking at the university. You know how much money they saved? $1 million a year.
Who's paying the parking fees?
The students paid for the parking fees. But the university, it was costing them an additional $1 million, so that their costs went down. And they still had parking, and it still was being paid for by the student anyway.
They make up their money on the tickets.
Yeah, right. But the point being is, you know, we have colleges that are spending money for things to make college life better. What we've done in this state is incentivize going to community college first for the first 2 years, and then transitioning into one of our colleges, university system. Yeah. What we also have done too is we've used our community college system with employers, because right now employers are struggling to get trained workers. And what happens is by using the community college system, they get a degree in ABC production that fits right into that job with the company that has approached them. So now we're creating a $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year job for somebody right out of community college. So the goal is to get a educated workforce. How we get it is up to the individual. Now, if they want to spend, $100,000 worth of bills to get a degree in underwater basket weaving, I can't help you. Like art history. I mean, I don't know how many jobs there are for art history.
Probably more than for the underwater
Basket weaving? Yeah, it might be.
That's a special talent.
Yeah, it depends on if you live near the ocean. But I'm saying that there's multiple factors there, and it's not government things. There is one thing, though, that I thought about, is there's always empty seats in a classroom, right? I mean, 1, 2, 5, I don't know how many. And based on demographics, if you're poor, you're a foster child. By the way, I've got a good bill that I put through for foster kids too. Is that why don't we allow companies to help subsidize the people to fill those seats? In other words, they're not going to get a degree right away, but at least they'll start the process, and it'll be lower cost or no cost for these these poorer families.
We have a couple of YouTube questions we want to get to before we have to let you go. Sure. Joyce asks, what would you do to repeal the Cadillac tax on health insurance plans?
It's a numbers game, right? I mean, right now, Obamacare, or Affordable Care Act, we're seeing providers leaving the system because they can't make the money that they needed to. They were actually initially supposed to make a certain percentage, I think it was like 10 or 15% on their cost, and they're still losing money. It could be adverse selection, I don't know what it is. But what they're saying in this question is, how do we get rid of the Cadillac tax, which is one of the pieces that was paying for the Affordable Care Act, just like the tax on medical devices. So I'd have to look at the numbers and see how much this is. But the Cadillac tax usually affects most union members, because they have negotiated the better programs at one time in lieu of lower pay, right? But that now has changed too. But I'd have to see, I mean, it's a hypothetical question. I'm not saying yes or no. I'm just saying is what the impact is. I'd rather have the plan in which it's an individual plan. You buy what you wanted at the time you wanted it, and then go from there.
Is that Joyce from the next office?
It might have been. Daniel
CFO.
asks, shifting to foreign policy,
Yeah.
should we be taking in Syrian refugees, both nationally and in New Hampshire? And if so, what's an acceptable number?
The answer is no, unless we can vet them, and we can't vet them. Governor Kasich had a plan, which I endorse, is that, and I mentioned it offline, is that we should go back to Syria with the Marine Corps and put a line in the sand, if I could use that acronym, and say from here back is where the Syrians who don't want to be part of the mess now are going to be living, and protect it. And then send the Army Corps of Engineers in there and build some buildings and say this is where your mosque will be, this is where your store will be. This, in other words, basically, it would be like a base that they're building, and say you can live back in your country. Because until we can vet these people, the current Obama administration wants to allow these people in, and we can't vet them, and we don't know who the terrorist is. Then they want to take away your guns to protect yourself.
That answer seems to conflict with your earlier answer on not knowing whether to approve use of force in that region.
Well, in this case, what we're doing is we're allowing and protecting the Syrians who want to stay in their country, versus the other question was a declaration of war. We're not declaring war. We're saying is we're helping the existing Syrians repatriate.
You're referring to a safe zone.
Exactly.
All right. Jack,
Well, what about extreme vetting, as Donald Trump says?
extreme vetting.
That's quote unquote. That's a Donald Trump quote on his plan for refugees, having an ideological test for these refugees and immigrants into the United States.
I'd like to see it first, Dan. I mean, that's the one thing about the government that it's like, hey, we got this great idea, and it's really not always that great. I don't know what the details were. I mean, it's not like running a credit check, right? Or a DM. I mean, what do we know about these people? I mean, if you really think about it, do we know anything about their background? And we may or may not know where they came from, what part of the country that they were in. I mean, there's so many variables. I don't even know how you could do your extreme vetting. Maybe there's a qualifier, right? Are they married? Do they have children? Do they have a reasonable job there that they're fleeing from because of, governmental persecution? Again, you could have, a slew of different variables. I just don't know which ones might make it a better program.
Jack Flanagan,
Yes, sir.
if you make it through the first round,
Yes.
we'll have you back for more extreme vetting after September and before the general election.
Is this like the second interview then? I jokingly say this whole process is like a 5-month interview.
In some respects it is,
Right.
which is probably a good thing. And it's a good thing that there are people like you who want to put themselves forth and take that kind of questioning and say
Yeah.
where you are on issues and want to serve your country. So
Can I do a gratuitous plug?
Sure.
Flanagan, the number 4nh.com. You can see the issues on what Joe said about issues, but also there's a little red button for donating if you like what you heard today. Mrs. Custer's got $2 million, so it's an uphill battle, and there's an awful lot of people campaigning. But
She's going to have to use that to relocate to Brooklyn.
that's for sure, where it's much safer.
Right.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for coming in. All right.
Grant, it's good to see you again.
Thank you, Representative.
And Dan, we'll bump into each other again, I'm sure.
Thank you.
And the guy down there, what did he do? He monitored the whole